The American Wild West was a land of vast landscapes and harsh realities. With immense deserts, arid mountains, and cities under construction, this territory was marked by a constant struggle for survival. However, the story that is usually told is that of the men, cowboys, gunfighters, and outlaws. They dominated the narratives, made the decisions, and often shaped the destinies of those who crossed their paths. But behind all this brutal scenery, there were women who also took control of their own fate, challenging societal norms and proving that the Wild West was not just a stage for men. While men occupied the trenches of the fight for land, power, and honor, women, often relegated to the roles of wives and mothers, began to stand out in various fields. The society of the time, deeply patriarchal and male-dominated, did not accept that women could be on the same level as men. They were not seen as equals, but as an extension of their husbands or fathers. However, some women refused to conform to this view and decided to break the limits imposed by society. These women were not mere side characters in the stories of the Wild West. Many of them took on leadership roles, faced unimaginable dangers, and carved out their space in an era where a woman's value was constantly questioned. Their role, though invisible in most traditional narratives, was crucial to the formation of the Wild West. They dealt with fear, loneliness, and the violence of a society in constant flux, and often proved to be stronger than the very land they inhabited. In this context, the Wild West became not just a space for exploration for men, but also a fertile ground for female resistance. Women, far from being mere spectators of a story that did not concern them, played prominent roles, each in their own way, challenging the standards of the time and often unknowingly changing the course of a nation still in the process of being built. They were pioneers, warriors, leaders, and, above all, challengers of the status quo. The Wild West was undoubtedly one of the most challenging periods in American history, where survival depended on both physical and mental resilience. For women, this environment was even more complex, as they not only faced the adversities of the land, but also the rigid standards of a society that did not see them as equals. A woman's role in the Wild West was, generally, limited to that of a wife who takes care of the home and children, a life that restricted her possibilities and actions. However, many women decided to challenge this reality and break free from the expectations of the time. These women were often considered outsiders, not only for occupying unexpected roles in society, but also for their defiant stance toward what was allowed for a woman. They did not conform to the submissive role society wanted them to play. As a result, some became pioneers in various activities that had previously been dominated by men: outlaws, cowgirls, shopkeepers, and even sharpshooters. For them, the Wild West was not a place of limitation, but a space where it was possible to forge their own destiny, often at the cost of their own safety. Many of these women were not seeking recognition or fame. They simply wanted to live with freedom and courage, unburdened by traditional norms. The transition from women who were seen only as housewives to figures of power and action was one of the greatest silent revolutions of the Wild West. They had to fight against the idea that a woman could not be at the helm of a group, lead a stagecoach, or even dominate the battlefield. By defying these expectations, these women helped redefine the concept of strength and resilience in society at the time. The Wild West, with its lawlessness and lack of regulations, gave these women the opportunity to break the chains that had limited them. As outsiders, they were willing to be seen as different and outside the norm, and by doing so, they changed the perception that a woman could not be as brave as a man. Not only did they survive, but they also excelled in a world where their presence was a threat to the men who were accustomed to being the only ones to rule the land. The Wild West was the setting for countless stories of courage, many of which involved women who defied the norms of their time and became legendary figures. What was considered normal for a woman back then, marrying, taking care of the house, and raising children, was not the fate that some of these women accepted. They were bold, fearless, and willing to challenge the system in ways few would dare. Many of them became criminals, but their actions were, in many cases, a reflection of what was happening in a deeply unequal society. Women like Belle Starr and Annie Oakley became icons of courage, defying expectations and facing the challenges of a world controlled by men. Belle Starr became known as the Queen of Outlaws, involved in criminal activities such as robberies and stagecoach holdups. Her story is filled with mystery and adventure, reflecting the courage of a woman who refused to adhere to the rules. She was not the only one. Calamity Jane, one of the most well-known figures of the West, was another woman who stood out. Known for her skill with weapons and her bravery amid chaos, she became a living legend compared to the boldest men of the time. But the courage of these women was not just in their willingness to commit crimes. They faced constant adversity in their fight to be respected in a world where their position was marginalized. Many of these women fought against the prejudice and stigma of society, constantly being seen as outlaws not only for their actions, but for challenging the expectations of how a woman should behave. They represented a threat to the status quo, and because of that, their stories were often distorted, romanticized, or even forgotten. What makes these stories even more powerful is that, unlike the men who were celebrated for their achievements, the women who became legends in the Wild West faced great erasure of their stories. They were often treated as exceptions or folkloric figures, their achievements minimized or ignored. Yet, what they did was challenge the system, and by doing so they left a legacy of resistance and bravery that transcends time. In the Wild West, where survival depended on courage and hard work, many women began to look beyond the traditional domestic life and ventured into the world of business. In a society where the market was predominantly male, these women defied expectations by becoming successful entrepreneurs, demonstrating vision and leadership capabilities that few believed possible for a woman of that time. Women were not just tending to homes or raising children. They were managing saloons, stores, hotels, and even entire properties. One of the most emblematic figures in this scenario was Mary Fields, better known as Stagecoach Mary. She stood out as one of the first women to drive stagecoaches, transporting mail and goods in one of the most dangerous and male-dominated jobs of the time. Her strength and independence were not only a reflection of her skill, but also the need for many women to find ways to sustain themselves and thrive, defying the patriarchal system that limited their options. Furthermore, women like Sarah Bowman, a cook and businesswoman who also helped during the Indian Wars, and Martha Calamity Jane Canary, who also ventured into business as a merchant and even founded a hotel, demonstrated that the West was not just for men who were in combat or the arms trade. These women were multifaceted, capable of navigating different business spheres, and by doing so proved that entrepreneurship was not gender-defined. They understood the value of money and hard work, and they stood out by creating empires from scratch, challenging the idea that the West was solely a male-dominated territory. These stories are often overshadowed by traditional narratives, but they are crucial in understanding the revolutionary role of women in the West. They proved that women could not only survive, but also thrive in an environment where risk and uncertainty were constant. By doing business and building empires, these women helped shape the economy of the Wild West, creating spaces of power that went beyond the traditional female figure of the time. Their success was a cry of resistance that echoed far beyond the boundaries of their properties. In the Wild West, where law was often unclear and violence was part of everyday life, many women did not settle for merely observing the conflicts, but actively participated in the struggles that shaped the destiny of the region. They faced not only the dangers of the wild environment, but also the forces of authority, such as the police, military, and even local figures of power. In doing so, these women challenged the system in a way that few dared, showing that their courage and resistance were just as present as those of the men. One of the most notable figures of this kind of resistance was Sarah Bowman, who, in addition to her work as a cook, also actively participated in the Indian Wars, demonstrating courage and leadership. She was a woman who was not afraid to engage in battles and resist military forces, which was extremely rare for a woman at the time. Her active involvement in such a violent and challenging context reflects the spirit of resistance that many women in the Wild West had, even when they were seen merely as bystanders. Another example of a warrior woman was Annie Oakley, who became a central figure in resisting male power in the Wild West. She was an exceptionally skilled sharpshooter, able to challenge men's expectations of women's abilities, and presented herself as a figure of resistance, not only on the battlefield, but also in shooting competitions. She became a legend, gaining the respect of many, including the men who initially doubted her skill and courage. Annie not only resisted the system, but did so brilliantly, challenging gender stereotypes with each accurate shot. These women did not just defend themselves, but also took an active stance against the injustices they faced. They were not intimidated by men or authorities, and by engaging in battles and confrontations, they not only survived, but also showed that the Wild West was not dominated only by men. Their resistance was not just physical, but also symbolic, representing the struggle for recognition and the right to be seen as equals. Through their bravery, they challenged the norms and wrote a chapter of history that for a long time had been overlooked. In the Wild West, life was unforgiving for everyone, but for women, the challenges were even more intense. They not only faced the risks of a hostile environment, but also had to deal with societal expectations that limited them, while being forced to play multiple roles. Women on the frontier were not just wives or mothers. They were farmers, healers, seamstresses, and even leaders, performing essential functions for the survival and development of small communities. In the absence of basic infrastructure and with the constant danger of attacks and natural disasters, women were responsible for many of the tasks that ensured the survival of their families. These women had to be practical and resilient. When homes were attacked, they defended their families and properties with courage, often facing bandits or Native Americans with little more than bravery and a weapon. In addition to defending their homes, many women also tended to the fields and livestock, tasks typically associated with men, but that, out of necessity, were assumed by the women. They became pioneers in adapting to the hostile environment, often doing everything alone while their husbands were away, either hunting or fighting. One emblematic example of a frontier woman is Clara Brown, an ex-slave who became one of the most notable pioneers of the West. Clara not only earned her place as an entrepreneur, but also played a key role in establishing communities, helping others settle in an unfamiliar and often cruel territory. Her determination and ability to adapt to a new world are a reflection of the many women who took their fate into their own hands, and, with that, played crucial roles in building cities and maintaining order in a place where the law was often absent. Furthermore, these women were not alone in their struggle for survival. They formed bonds with each other, creating support networks that were crucial for facing the hardships of everyday life. Women in the Wild West, even in a society that relegated them to the background, understood that their strength was in unity and the ability to face the world side by side. They cared for each other, sharing knowledge about natural remedies, farming techniques, and even how to protect themselves from external threats, creating a communal spirit that was essential for the survival of small frontier communities. In the Wild West, where the struggle for survival shaped every aspect of life, women faced even more complex personal challenges. In addition to external adversities, they had to deal with internal issues such as complicated relationships, loneliness, and stigmatization for defying social norms. Many women were on the margins of society, not only because of their actions, but also because of their choices. Unlike the traditional role of wife and mother that society expected, some of these women decided to follow their own path, often breaking away from families, husbands, and even conventional morality. These women were not only marginalized by the patriarchal society, but also by the fact that they made decisions that challenged the standards of the time. They did not see themselves as mere side characters in the narrative of life in the West. Many of them, like Belle Starr, lived on the fringes of the law and morality, getting involved with outlaws, engaging in illicit activities, or even facing local authorities. For their audacity, they were often labeled as lost women or dishonorable, but the truth was that by challenging the system, they were challenging a set of rules that had never been made for them. Moreover, relationships with men in the Wild West were not limited to submission. Women like Annie Oakley and Calamity Jane not only challenged male stereotypes, but also dealt with expectations of their femininity and behavior. The weight of loneliness was something common for many of these women. They were often distant from family and established communities, in harsh and unexplored lands, facing not only the external challenges of violence and nature, but also loneliness and a lack of emotional support. In many cases, their personal struggles were just as intense as the external battles they fought. These personal challenges, far from weakening the women of the Wild West, showcased the inner strength and resilience of each one. They were not just survivors, but women who faced not only the harshness of the external world, but also the impositions and pressures of a society that did not fully accept them. They lived on the margins, yet at the same time, they gave shape to a new concept of womanhood that, though marginalized, knew where it was going and what it was willing to conquer. The legacy of the women who challenged the men in the Wild West is not just a tale of individual resistance, but also a story of social transformation that reverberated over the years, changing how women would be viewed and treated in the decades to come. Although many of these women were forgotten or marginalized in traditional narratives, their contributions were vital to the progress and evolution of American society. They not only challenged the gender norms of their time, but also laid the groundwork for future feminist movements that would fight for equal rights, freedom, and recognition. The impact of these women in the Wild West goes far beyond stories of courage and bravery. They helped redefine what it meant to be a woman in a predominantly male society. By venturing into fields such as entrepreneurship, combat, leadership, and even crime, these women demonstrated that there were no limits to what they could achieve. They planted the seeds for a new era where women would be seen not just as wives and mothers, but as leaders, warriors, and professionals with their own agency. Over time, many of these figures, once ignored or distorted by history, began to be recognized not just as folkloric characters, but as pioneers of a movement that challenged the standards of their time. Women like Annie Oakley and Belle Starr became symbols of strength and autonomy, inspiring future generations to fight for their own freedoms and rights. The feminist movement, which gained momentum in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, can be seen as a continuation of the struggle that these women began on the frontiers of the Wild West. Today, the legacy of these women remains alive. They proved beyond doubt that women have the power to shape their own stories, regardless of the difficulties imposed upon them. The Wild West, with all its harshness and injustices, was the stage where these women defied the impossible, and in doing so, became the founders of a new kind of freedom and female empowerment, the repercussions of which continue to echo into the present.